The story started on Riveron Island when summer came. Guys who wanted to marry the daughters of House Riveron got chosen by the queen and visited the island for a 3-month vacation. The island became open for suitors when the daughters of House Riveron turned 17, which was the only time they could pick their future spouse. They called it the Magic Summer. Leah Riveron, the 4th daughter of the house, was ready for it. There were these dudes, Count Rosemond, who brought jewels as gifts, and Antoine, the 2nd son of Count Guol, who had nothing but his poems. Leah felt a bit overwhelmed, so she asked permission to step out for some fresh air and clear her mind to make a good decision, as this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. While she was out strolling, she ran into another suitor, Duke Julian Raenal, a commander who had played a big part in winning the First Imperial War. Leah was totally taken aback by how handsome Duke Raenal was. She asked if he was also just wandering around, but he said he had swung by to get her something. He had this mouth-watering peach from his estate and wanted to give it to her. So, being a sweet guy, he offered to peel it for her and then fed it to her. As he handed her the peeled peach, he mentioned that old saying, "They say if you eat the June peach, you'll live forever." Leah playfully asked if Duke Raenal was proposing to spend forever with her, and all he did was flash a smile, which turned her face beet red. She even daydreamed about marrying him and living happily ever after. However, her dreams came crashing down as Duke Raenal started avoiding her after that day. She couldn't figure out what she might have done wrong to push him away. In the midst of confusion, Leah started dating Antoine, who showed her a lot of care and affection. Fast forward 3 months to the final day of the magic summer, decision time. Antoine promised Leah a lifetime of happiness with his warm hugs, and Count Rosemond even dangled his jewels as a tempting offer. But Duke Raenal remained silent. Taking into account her wealth and beauty, Leah chose Antoine and his warm hugs, only to find out later that it was a huge mistake. So, on the wedding day, Leah's sister, Bella, asked her if she was really sure about marrying Antoine and if they truly loved each other. Leah wasn't really sure about love back then, but she thought Antoine treated her sweetly, so she reassured Bella that she would be happy. As time passed, Leah was almost 40 now, and she realized she had made a hasty promise when she was just 17. Antoine, the guy who had offered her a flower and promised happiness, turned out to have no money, talent, power, or connections. All he did was waste money on gambling and write poems and songs. Now they barely scraped by each day. When Leah suggested selling their land and moving back to Riveron Island, Antoine got furious and threw a plate at her, scratching her cheek. Despite their miserable life, he still clung to his pride. Then, out of nowhere, a knight from the Ranel duchy came to their door, saying that Duke Raenal wanted to buy the orchard on the Guol estate as soon as possible. Leah wondered why Duke Raenal would pay so much money for a faraway orchard, but she didn't care as long as they had a chance to start anew. Sadly, it only took Antoine half a year to squander all the money on gambling, and they were back to square one. Leah took some warm soup and went to Antoine's room when he was sick, but he just shouted at her to leave. Frustrated and regretful, she took a walk outside under the moonlight. Seeing the lavender, which usually blooms around her birthday, she realized she's now 40. She thought about how miserable her life turned out marrying a poor man. As she cried, she wished she could turn back time to when she was 17 and never make that marriage decision. And just like that, she found herself back at the age of 17. It was Leah's second magical summer, and she couldn't stop smiling with joy. She felt so light and refreshed as she strolled around. But then, she spotted Duke Raenal, who was about to give her a peach. In her previous life, Duke Raenal had ignored her after giving her the peach, and history repeated itself as he ignored her once more. Count Rosemond showered her with all kinds of jewelry, and Antoine's poems were still as childish as before. It seemed like not much had changed from her past life. But things were about to take a turn. 3 months passed, and it was proposal day. Leah turned down Antoine. From her past life, she learned that money was crucial, and as long as she had it, she wouldn't be that unhappy. Although she knew Count Rosemond could turn out just as awful as Antoine, she figured she wouldn't get hurt because she didn't love him. So, in her second life, she decided to marry Count Rosemond. However, that plan also went horribly wrong. Count Rosemond treated Leah like a delicate jewel that needed protection from all harm. He kept her locked up in a room that felt like a vault, and he had people around to only doll her up. He never cared about what Leah liked or disliked. On her 40th birthday, Count Rosemond came with other girls and wished her happy birthday. He then informed Leah that they had to cancel the banquet because of an urgent business trip. When she asked to visit her sister Bella, Count Rosemond refused, claiming it was too dangerous outside. Even though she was adorned with jewels and fancy dresses, Leah felt sick and unhappy. She began blaming herself for being foolish enough to end up in 2 failed marriages. When Leah saw the lavender in her room, she begged to go back one more time. She squeezed it tight and promised she wouldn't make the same stupid mistake again. And just like that, she found herself back in the lavender field at 17 again, with tears streaming down her face as she told her sister that she wouldn't get hitched again. In the Riveron's dining room, where the whole family was gathered, Leah's father, Duke Riveron, brought up the topic of Leah's suitors coming to the island, and out of the blue, Leah announced that she wasn't going to get married. This made Duke Riveron furious, and he stormed out of the room in anger. Despite her father's reaction, Leah stuck to her decision and firmly stated that she wouldn't marry anyone, no matter what. As time passed, things remained peaceful, and in the first week of June, the suitors arrived as planned. Antoine was still coming up with his cheesy poems. Rosemond was still treating her like a precious gem, and Duke Julian Raenal looked as dashing as ever with a peach in his hand. Julian asked Leah if she had ever tasted a peach before, and she casually replied that she had and described its taste. However, Julian seemed confused and asked if she had visited his estate before. Leah nonchalantly answered that Julian himself had given it to her. This only left Julian even more perplexed. Realizing his confusion was something new, Leah corrected herself and said she hadn't tasted it yet. She then asked Julian if he would peel it for her. As Julian peeled the peach, the juice dripped down his hand. Leah quickly offered her hand to help roll up his sleeve. She noticed Julian seemed a bit nervous and decided to surprise him further by licking the peach juice off his hand. This made Julian blush bright red. Stepping back, Julian called Leah by her name, but she quickly reminded him that he couldn't just call her by name without permission. Julian felt a bit flustered and apologized, but Leah, seeing him acting friendly, reassured him that it was fine and he didn't need to say sorry. Julian then asked Leah about the news he heard, that she didn't want to get married. Leah was straightforward and asked him why he was curious since he didn't plan on proposing anyway. Julian was puzzled by her response, so he asked her why she was so sure about that. Confidently, Leah pointed out that he had never proposed to her before, but she wasn't upset about it because they hadn't interacted enough to fall in love. She mentioned that they probably wouldn't see each other much since he always avoided her, though she wasn't sure why. Julian was left speechless, and Leah thought he must think she was weird. Unexpectedly, Julian smiled and said that Leah seemed like a special person with a mix of future and past experiences. Thinking she wouldn't see him again, Leah asked Julian if he wanted to hear an interesting story. Leah opened up to Julian, sharing everything about her first and second lives, a story she had never shared with anyone before. Maybe she felt she could be candid because she believed she wouldn't see him again. Or maybe it was Julian's calm demeanor that put her at ease. Out of nowhere, Julian asked Leah if she had died in her previous life, which seemed like an oddly specific question about the afterlife. Leah thought maybe he was just curious about that sort of thing. She explained that she hadn't died. She had simply returned, always on her 40th birthday, while looking at lavender, and she had desperately wished for another chance. As they kept walking, Julian mentioned that this was now her third life, to which Leah confidently said she was way older than him. However, Leah sensed there was something about Julian too, and she commented that his eyes seemed like they had witnessed a lot as well. She asked if he could see something similar in her eyes, but Julian smoothly dodged the question with a compliment, calling her eyes stunning, deep, and beautiful. His words made Leah's heart race like crazy. Walking faster, Leah clarified what she meant was that her eyes now held more secrets than when she was young and innocent, even though she didn't consider herself fully mature yet. Leah explained that growing older doesn't necessarily mean someone automatically becomes a better person. She used her father as an example, saying that old age didn't make him generous or wise. Hearing this, Julian smiled and asked if she didn't like her father. He shared that he also didn't have a great relationship with his father, as his dad was always busy working at the palace and passed away when Julian was young, so he didn't have many memories of him. However, he did cherish one memory of his father taking walks with him and his mother whenever he was home. Unexpectedly, Julian then hugged Leah, leaving her blushing. After they let go, he said it was the kind of hug his father gave to his mother. Suddenly, someone frantically called out to Leah, surprising both of them. It was Leah's nanny who called out to her, accompanied by Julian's servant, who reminded them to get ready for dinner. But before they went their separate ways, Julian asked if they could walk together again tomorrow morning. Leah happily accepted the invitation, and Julian responded with a smile, expressing his gratitude for getting to talk with her after such a long time. When Julian mentioned after so long, Leah was puzzled and asked if this was their first time walking together, but Julian clarified that it had been 23 years for Leah. Leah laughed, finding Julian's sense of humor amusing, and remarked that it was nice of him to see it from her perspective. Then Julian asked if she had a light blue dress, and Leah excitedly said it was her favorite one. Julian then requested that she wear that dress for their walk tomorrow, to which Leah said, "Sure." Before leaving, Julian kissed Leah's hand and asked for permission to go. Meanwhile, Leah couldn't take her eyes off Julian as he walked away. In the dining room, Leah was all set in her favorite dress. When Julian finally showed up, he asked if she planned on wearing that dress tomorrow. But Leah just grinned and replied that it would be dull if everything went according to plan. Duke Riveron sensed a connection between his daughter and Julian, but kept it to himself. Then the dinner kicked off, and the usual chit-chats filled the table. Duke Riveron led most of the conversations, while Antoine and Rosamond mindlessly nodded along with whatever he said. And Julian? Well, he just couldn't take his eyes off her the whole time. Leah quickly turned away, wondering what was going on with her. She had sworn off getting married again, but here she was, completely fixated on Julian. As she tried to convince herself that she wasn't going to marry him anyway, Julian flashed an even brighter smile while whispering something to Leah. This left her wondering what he was trying to say. After the feast, Leah asked if she could pop by her room to grab something to keep her warm. Both Antoine and Rosamond tried to be chivalrous and offered her their coats. But Leah turned them down, insisting she could manage on her own. Suddenly, Julian swooped in and wrapped his coat around her, saying he would accompany her since it was dark. Antoine quickly chimed in, offering to escort her as well. But Duke Riveron intervened and said he had something to discuss with them, and asked Julian to accompany Leah. As they walked together to her room, Leah casually mentioned that she thought her father liked Julian. Out of the blue, he asked her if she also liked him. Leah stopped and looked at him, asking if it really mattered. Julian responded with a yes, and it caught Leah off guard. In the past, he had avoided her, so she never expected him to ask such a question. But now, in this life, he was so different, looking at her with such gentle eyes. Before the dinner, Leah asked her nanny to get the blue dress that Julian had requested. But there was a mix-up, and the nanny thought Julian wanted Leah to wear the dress for the dinner, which made the maids jump to the conclusion that she would marry Julian. But Leah was quick to clarify that she wasn't getting married. So that was why she ended up wearing the dress that night instead of tomorrow. And now, Julian threw Leah off guard by asking what she was thinking about him. Leah turned away and admitted she didn't really know. She shared her thoughts about Julian, mentioning that she used to be annoyed by him because he always avoided her, but now she felt like he was actually a good person. As they reached Leah's room, she quickly grabbed her shawl and then returned to Julian, who was waiting for her. Then they headed back to join Duke Riveron, but suddenly, Julian asked Leah to hold her shawl aside for a moment. He said he'd like to see her in that dress one last time before they went back. Leah smiled and playfully teased Julian for staring at her, and he responded with a big grin, telling her it was because she was beautiful. Leah couldn't help but be curious, so she asked Julian why he wanted her to wear that dress, as if he had seen her in it before. Julian paused for a moment and then confessed that he had seen her wear the dress before, and she looked incredibly beautiful back then, just as she did now. Leah wondered why Julian kept using words like still, or as always, as if he already knew her. It all seemed a bit mysterious to her. Leah didn't beat around the bush and directly asked Julian what was going on, as he spoke as if he knew her so well. With a serious expression, she tried to figure things out, asking if Julian had attended Bella's wedding where she wore the same dress. She even mentioned reciting a poem there, thinking he might have seen her. Julian couldn't help but confess, admitting that he did see her at the wedding. Excitedly, Leah asked him to spill the truth, and Julian couldn't hold back any longer. He admitted that he just wanted to see her in that dress again, thinking it would satisfy him, but seeing her in it only made it harder for him to give up. Perplexed, Lee asked Julian what he meant by giving up. He turned his gaze to her, looking sad, and replied that he wanted to let go of the idea of being with her. He went on to say that she was everything to him, and no one else was like her. He believed she deserved to marry the perfect husband. Julian then reached into his pocket, took out something, and knelt down in front of her. He promised to do his best to become the perfect person for her. Opening a small box, he showed her the ring inside and declared that he would dedicate his whole life to her and only her. He vowed that his body and heart would always belong to her, whether in this life or the next. Leah was left speechless, blushing as Julian proposed to her. Asking Julian to get up, and Lee straight up told him that she didn't want to get married because it had never brought her happiness. Julian stood up and reassured her, promising to bring her so much happiness that it would outweigh any troubles they might face. Still unsure about what to say, Leah told Julian that he was more than capable of finding someone better than her. But Julian was quick to respond, saying that no one was better than her in his eyes. As he wrapped her in her shawl, Julian expressed his eagerness to live with her as soon as possible. Leah straightforwardly asked Julian if he loved her, and he proudly admitted that he had loved her since the first time they met. But Leah expressed her worry, wondering if this was her last chance, to which Julian hoped it was, saying he'd be devastated if they got married and she disappeared when she turned 40. Leah then asked if Julian had ever imagined being with her when she was 40, and he replied that he had imagined it more than 100 times. He reassured her that it didn't matter how many times he imagined it. What mattered most was her heart. Reflecting on her past marriages, Leah realized what the issue had been all along. She confessed that she never had feelings for any of them, not even once. She explained that if she had loved them, then she might have been able to endure their treatment with love. Hearing this, Julian confidently assured Leah that she didn't need to worry about that, as she would love him. Seeing how sincere and genuine Julian was about his feelings, it made Leah feel reassured. And just like that, the proposal didn't seem like a bad idea anymore. As Leah lay on her bed, she couldn't help but think about her past lives. First, she married Antoine because he was nice to her, but she realized her heart never really felt anything special for him. Then she married Rosamund because she believed money was everything after her experience with Antoine. But again, she knew she didn't love him, and it was foolish to think that the absence of love would make things better. But now, when she made up her mind not to get married, Julian confidently told her that she would love him. And the truth was, Leah felt butterflies in her stomach whenever she thought about Julian. Despite that, she still wasn't entirely sure about getting married just yet. The next morning, Leah looked exhausted, but she still went to see Julian, who was happy to see her in the morning. He brought up the proposal from last night, and Leah mentioned that he might have to wait a long time for her decision. With a warm smile, Julian assured her that he would be patient as long as she allowed him to be by her side. Then they started talking about hobbies, and Leah mentioned that she liked gardening and reading books. Julian hadn't really thought about it before, but he thought painting might be a hobby he'd enjoy. Excitedly, Leah asked him to draw a portrait of her. Not wasting any time, Leah quickly gathered the painting tools so Julian could start making her portrait right away. She even changed into a different dress for the occasion. As Julian focused on painting, their eyes met several times, and it seemed like he was smiling more each time. Julian couldn't help but laugh, teasing Leah that her face was turning redder every time he looked at her, making it hard for him to choose the right colors. Blushing all over her face, Leah nervously explained that it was because of the heat. Julian then suggested they take a break, and as Leah was about to walk away, she accidentally stepped on her own dress and tripped. In a panic, Julian tried to catch her, but they both ended up falling, and Leah landed right on top of Julian. Noticing that Leah had hurt her ankle, Julian quickly scooped her up, his expression turning serious as he assured her that he would take her to the doctor. Leah couldn't help but wonder if Julian was angry. Thankfully, the doctor examined her ankle and reassured them that it was just a minor strain and would heal soon. Julian visibly relaxed upon hearing the news, relieved that it wasn't anything serious. Leah, being curious, directly told Julian that he had a scary look on his face, and she thought he was angry. Julian explained that he was just worried that she might have been seriously injured. Now that they couldn't continue with the painting, Leah felt disappointed because she had been looking forward to teasing him if he hadn't painted her well. Leah mentioned that she had already asked the servants to prepare some drinks in the hall and invited Julian to join her there. Julian stood up and extended his hand, ready to escort Leah. As they walked together, Leah couldn't help but steal glances at Julian. She thought to herself that she had never been escorted by a man outside of a banquet before, and she couldn't believe how sweet he was. Julian noticed her glances and asked if something was wrong. Feeling a bit flustered, Leah quickly avoided eye contact and said everything was fine. Julian still had a worried expression, but he reassured her to let him know if she felt any pain at all. Leah responded with a smile, thinking how wonderful it would be to walk with such a sweet person every day. She then realized how tall and attractive Julian was, and her mind started to wander, imagining him in a more intimate way. Blushing all over her face, she couldn't believe what she had just thought while he was right next to her. As they arrived at the hall, Leah couldn't help but let out a big sigh. Her mind and heart were all over the place, and she wondered if that could be love. She found herself unable to stop thinking about Julian, and she wondered if she had fallen for him the moment he made her heart flutter. Her thoughts were swirling in circles, and the idea of asking him to sleep with her crossed her mind. But amidst all the chaos, a new desire settled in her thoughts. Despite the confusion in her mind, the time Leah spent with Julian from then on continued without any more trouble. As night fell, before parting ways, they both expressed how much they enjoyed their time together. Julian then asked if he could see Leah again tomorrow morning. But unexpectedly, Leah voiced her disappointment, saying that she was starting to feel like Julian had forgotten that he proposed to her, as he was treating her more like a friend than a partner. So, she wanted to clarify things. Understanding her concern, Julian tried to be honest. He held Leah's hand and told her that he had been thinking about her all day, cherishing every moment they spent together because he knew it would never come back. He expressed his hope that they could continue like this forever. Julian got down on one knee and proposed to her again, asking her to marry him. As he slid the ring onto Leah's finger, Julian pleaded with her to say yes. Leah hesitated for a moment, but then finally said she would, but on one condition. Julian immediately asked what the condition was, eager to know. Looking straight into Julian's eyes, Leah bravely stated that she wanted to spend the night with him. Just once. Stunned for a moment, Julian couldn't help but smile, saying that Leah hadn't changed one bit. Leah playfully retorted that he hadn't known her for that long to make such a judgment. Julian then agreed that he would accept Leah's request if it meant she would consider marrying him. Leah was straightforward, expressing her thoughts about her failed marriages and how she had no expectations for marriage, only in the bedroom. She told him that she wasn't sure about marrying him, but one thing she was certain about was wanting to be with him intimately. So she boldly asked him to kiss her. Julian was totally caught off guard by Leah's unexpected request. At first he hesitated, but then he went for it, planting soft kisses on her forehead, cheek, and finally locking lips. Not wanting to waste a single second, Leah whisked him off to her room. The next morning, Leah woke up to find Julian still right next to her, and she had slept on his arm. As Julian woke up, he pulled her closer and playfully begged for a little more time cuddling, repeatedly expressing his love for her. Leah couldn't help but grant Julian's wish. Out of the blue, Leah said, "I think I love you too," adding the word "think" out of embarrassment. Julian felt like Leah was playing with his heart, but then she surprised him by saying they were getting married. Julian was overjoyed and quickly got up, asking if he could tell everyone they were getting married. As Leah gave him the green light, he quickly put on his clothes, then assured Leah not to worry about anything else and told her to rest while he got things ready. House Raenal has been around since the kingdom's inception. Julian, the 19th Duke of Raenal, is a highly respected commander in the kingdom. When he was 15, his father passed away during the First Imperial War, and he took over as commander, achieving remarkable feats comparable to his father's. But you know what's strange? Despite all that, he isn't famous for his good looks. Just when Leah was still sleeping, her door swung open and her family barged in to wake her up. First, her little sister Marianne, followed by Bella, Beth, and Margaret, and even her mother. They were all overjoyed when they heard that Leah and Julian planned to tie the knot. Not stopping there, all the maids and her father congratulated her as well. Apparently, Julian had told literally everyone about the news. Word spread like wildfire, and soon, the whole of Riveron knew about Leah and Julian's upcoming marriage. Antoine and Rosamond, the other suitors, were shown the door at Riveron Manor after losing their status. Once Duke Riveron gave his consent, a messenger would be dispatched to the kingdom to get Her Majesty's approval. Leah couldn't believe how everything unfolded in just one day. As she headed to see Julian, she coincidentally ran into him halfway. She was flustered to see that her nanny had set her up with a matching dress to Julian's outfit. They walked hand in hand, and suddenly, Leah couldn't hold her curiosity any longer. She asked Julian why he fell in love with her. Julian paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts before he could answer Leah's question. But just as Julian was about to respond, their moment was ruined by someone calling out to them. It was Bella and Leah's other sister. And in a flash, they whisked Julian away. Leah got worried and asked if he was all right, to which he replied with a beaming smile. When Leah tried to escape the situation, Bella caught her, and before she knew it, they were having tea time and chit-chatting. Bella seemed genuinely happy for Leah, and it surprised Leah because in the past, Bella had been worried when Leah was going to marry Antoine. Now, Bella didn't seem worried at all. Curious, Leah asked Bella if she knew Julian before, as he had mentioned seeing Leah at Bella's wedding. But Bella revealed that this was the first time they had met. Bella suddenly stood up and asked if Julian fell in love with Leah at her wedding and came all the way there to marry her. Leah confirmed it, and Bella remarked that Leah's happy face was the look of someone who had fallen in love. Leah couldn't believe that the same person who once declared she wouldn't get married was now completely captured by Julian's charm. She pondered if this was what falling in love felt like. Feeling the need for some rest, she asked for permission to leave the gathering. As she descended the stairs, she couldn't help but keep thinking about her decision to marry Julian. Things were moving so fast, and she hadn't had much time to reflect. But as she opened the door, a surprise awaited her. Julian was standing there, smiling and suggesting that they should have their wedding right there. In the East Wing basement where Leah's room was, there happened to be a small back door. That door led to a secret garden that no one else knew about or ever used except Leah. She had discovered it a few years ago and only shared the secret with Bella. Since then, they both took care of the garden together. But Leah couldn't figure out how Julian found out about the place. So, she straightforwardly asked him how he knew. Julian revealed that he had noticed that whenever Leah needed some time to think, she would go there. Leah was even more amazed that he knew this, considering it was something only she had shared with Bella. She started wondering if Bella had told Julian everything. Nonetheless, she welcomed Julian to the garden and asked if he found it beautiful. Julian agreed, and that's why he suggested having their marriage there. Leah was a bit surprised, knowing that weddings were usually held at the groom's estate. But Julian assured her that they could have it at Ranel if she wanted. He remembered that she wished to get married in a lavender garden, and Leah was taken aback that Julian recalled her words. She expressed her hope that this marriage would be successful, perhaps hinting that she might be falling in love with him. but she didn't want her entire life to depend solely on this moment. Julian was considerate and asked how Leah wanted the wedding to be. She listed all the things she had never had in her past lives. Julian hugged her from behind and reassured her that her requests were quite reasonable, promising to do everything she wanted and make sure she was happy. Leah couldn't help but be curious about why Julian fell in love with her, knowing that he only got to love her in this life. But Julian refused to see it that way and stated that he had always loved her. Bella was totally shocked when she learned that Leah was planning to have her wedding next week, on her birthday of all days, as Julian had suggested having it at the same time. Leah explained that she wanted to keep it simple and only invite her nanny and sisters. So, now Leah and Julian were discussing their wedding preparation. When they talked about the dress she would wear, Julian suggested the blue dress he had asked her about before. Leah asked why he seemed to like it so much, and he simply said that he liked her even more when she was wearing that dress. Recently, it had become a trend among the nobility to skip the grand wedding ceremony and instead get their marriage certificate stamped by the queen. It was a much simpler process, saving time, cost, and energy. Only nobles with a title higher than Marquis could apply for this, so it was considered an honor. Julian gave Leah a marriage contract paper and told her to read and sign it. As she read through it, she realized that everything in the contract was exactly what she had mentioned before. When she asked Julian if he needed anything from her, he simply smiled and said all he needed was for her to stay healthy and always be by his side. Finally, the wedding day arrived after a week. As Leah, her sisters, and Nanny went to the garden, Leah wondered what Julian had prepared for her. To her astonishment, everything she had asked for was perfectly set up, and she was taken aback by how thoughtful Julian had been in arranging it all. It turned out just as Leah had imagined, and she couldn't believe how Julian had managed to put everything together in such a short time. Even the music playing was her all-time favorite, a song she had loved since childhood. It truly felt like the beginning of something new and magical. Julian appeared before her, greeting her with grace and kissing her hand. He complimented Leah, saying how stunning she looked. He then gifted her a royal jewel that shone even more beautifully in her hair. With everything set, Julian took Leah's hand and they walked down the aisle together. Julian revealed that he had been eagerly awaiting this moment for what felt like ages. He expressed that of all the souls that ever existed, he had chosen her, and despite the endless pain and waiting, he never regretted that choice. He declared that even if life rewound and repeated itself, he would still choose her in every lifetime. Leah was deeply touched by Julian's unwavering determination and declared in her heart that she, too, would choose him again and again, as she was now sure about her feelings for him. Callian, someone brought by Julian, spoke words of blessings, stating that Julian and Leah had become one through love and that they would remain together through any hardships and find happiness in the end. After exchanging their vows, their wedding was sealed with a loving kiss. Time flew by quickly after the wedding, and they traveled by carriage towards the capital. There, they had an audience with the queen, and their marriage was officially approved. The journey continued until they arrived at the Ranel estate. Upon arriving, Leah noticed a high fence by the river and wondered about its purpose. Inside the manor, she was even more surprised to see that the decorations perfectly suited her taste. It was like a dream come true. Out of nowhere, Leah couldn't help but ask Julian about the high fence she had spotted earlier. He appeared a bit taken aback by the question, but explained that it was built because someone had fallen into the river and drowned. Leah's curiosity got the better of her, and she asked if the person had died. Julian gently stroked her hair, flashing a smile, and smoothly changed the subject, mentioning how Leah had been busy looking around since their arrival and wishing she could give him some attention too. Playfully, Leah questioned if Julian was feeling jealous at that moment, and he admitted to it. She found it hard to believe, teasing him that it might just be some kind of game. After all, with his handsome face, Julian must have had plenty of dating experience, right? But Julian insisted he was being genuine and made it clear that Leah was the only woman in his life. Drawing his face closer, he told her she was free to believe him or not, leaving Leah feeling both flattered and amazed at his sincerity. It had been 3 months since Leah moved to the Raenal estate, and despite her initial worries, she had been enjoying her time there, especially with Julian being so kind to her. However, at the moment, Julian was away on a tour to inspect the countryside estates, and Leah couldn't help but feel a little lonely without him. Luckily, her sisters Beth and Bella came to visit, and they were all thrilled to see each other again. Beth was eager to see the library that Leah had been raving about in her letters, so they headed there first. The library turned out to be even more impressive than the one in Riveron, with a vast collection of books. They continued the tour through various rooms, including the one with jewels and fine crafts, the dressing room, and a garden that reminded Leah of her secret garden back in Riveron. Leah proudly showed them the rooms named after each Riveron family member. But when Beth asked about Leah's room, she revealed that she didn't have one as she preferred to sleep with Julian every day. During the tour, Beth noticed a room with a locked door and couldn't resist asking Leah what was inside. Leah explained that based on what Julian had told her, it was Julian's storage room, filled with clutter and considered dusty and humid. Beth's curiosity grew, and she playfully joked about the possibility of Julian having secrets hidden in there, maybe even a secret woman. Bella intervened, trying to stop Beth from going too far with her teasing. Even though Beth had convinced them that she was just joking, Leah couldn't stop thinking about that locked room throughout the entire week until the day Beth and Bella left. Despite Julian always being nice to her, there were moments when Leah felt like he might be hiding something from her. Still, she tried to convince herself that there was probably nothing significant in that room, so she decided to take a quick peek. After all, Julian kept a key in his office drawer and didn't try to hide it, leading Leah to believe that there was nothing secretive about it. With her curiosity at its peak, Leah mustered the courage to open the door. To her surprise, the room was much cleaner than she had imagined, and there wasn't really anything significant inside. As she brought a lantern inside, she noticed a big board on the wall, filled with writings detailing various causes of death. It mentioned deaths from high fever, instant death after being struck by lightning under the walnut tree, accidental deaths from carriages overturning down the river from the bridge, drowning in the estate lake, and falling to death from the east tower due to an attack by an unknown assailant. The mention of the lake at the estate triggered Leah's memory, recalling that Julian had once mentioned someone drowning there. The whole thing left her feeling uneasy and uncertain about what it all meant. As she examined the writing on the board more closely, Leah noticed that each entry had something written underneath it. For example, under the drowning in the lake part, there was something about how to deal with the lake, which made her wonder if the fence was put up to hide something. Then, under the someone falling from the east tower section, there was a note about the height at which a person won't die from a fall. It sent a chill down her spine, and she couldn't help but think that what she was reading on the board seemed like plans for murder. Shocked by this revelation, Leah's eyes fell on her own portrait that was displayed there. As she tried to process everything, someone suddenly grabbed her shoulder from behind. She turned around to see Julian's cold expression, and he asked her if he hadn't told her not to enter the room. Leah's mind was in disarray, wondering if the man she loved might actually be a murderer. Let's rewind way before this all went down. So, Julian had this meeting with Her Majesty, and it was pretty clear he wasn't thrilled about it. Her Majesty wanted him to tie the knot, and she revealed a portrait of his potential wife, Isabella Riveron, Leah's big sis. Julian didn't seem impressed, even though Isabella was supposed to be the belle of the kingdom. He came up with this idea that he'd join some war and asked Her Majesty for a 3-year break. He said he'd come back and do whatever she wanted after that. On his way back after meeting Her Majesty, he was annoyed that she kept pushing him to get hitched. He believed people should know there's nothing good about marriage, especially considering his own family experience. His dad was a tough and heartless soldier, and his mom was a royal descendant who couldn't do anything on her own. It was a sad situation with a woman craving affection and a man ignoring her, leaving their kid neglected. After growing up witnessing all that, Julian never even considered getting married. He wanted to prioritize his work and not be bothered by marriage. He thought it would be way better to stay single, so he needed to come up with a solid excuse for the next 3 years. Time flew like a freaking bullet train, and there he was again, meeting Her Majesty. She had this big smile on her face and dropped a bombshell on Julian. She wanted him to take a 3-month vacation to Riveron Island. He was totally caught off guard by that. On top of that, she expected him to come back with news of his upcoming wedding. It made him so mad. But he had to keep his cool because he was stuck in a carriage with other suitors. He reminded himself that just because he was going to Riveron didn't mean he had to tie the knot. As Julian sat there, he couldn't help but eavesdrop on Antoine and Rosamond's chat. And it was crystal clear that Her Majesty chose them on purpose. Wanting Leah to pick Julian over those guys, no doubt about it. It had been 3 years already, and Isabella was married to someone else. So these suitors were probably competing for the hand of the 4th Riveron daughter. In Riveron, Julian was venting to his buddy, Edmund, about how he got dragged to a place he didn't want to be and had to attend the ball right after arriving. Edmund asked if he'd seen Leah, and Julian made this snarky remark, saying she looked too thin, like she starved herself for days just to fit into a pretty dress. But to be fair, Julian admitted that Leah was charming and beautiful, but she just wasn't his type. Edmund was curious and asked what Julian's type was. After thinking about it for a bit, Julian replied that he liked a woman who was a bit calculating like him, drop-dead gorgeous but also cold and cunning, smart but not too bright, and definitely not obsessed with getting married. He believed he could get along with someone like that. Edmund said that Leah seemed to fit the description, but Julian quickly shut that down, thinking she was probably too assertive for his taste. Plus, he didn't want to be tied down by marriage to Duke Riveron, whom he saw as a shallow man for basically selling off his 7 daughters. Out of the blue, Leah stormed up to Julian with this angry look on her face. He was totally caught off guard, but then, in a flash, Leah's expression switched, and she greeted Julian. And that's how their first meeting went down. Pretty crazy, right? The day after the ball during morning tea time, Leah and Julian found themselves in an awkward situation. Leah shot Julian a mean look, while he tried his best to stay cool. Suddenly, Leah broke the ice, saying she'd forgive what Julian said the day before, claiming he made rude remarks. But Julian fired back, asking if he really said something rude. Annoyed, Leah insisted he did and expected an apology. However, Julian didn't think he needed forgiveness and even asked Leah if she agreed that her father turned his daughters into a business. Although he didn't mean for her to hear it, he thought maybe hitting the wrong note with her could get him out of marriage trouble. Julian didn't hold back and said what he really thought about Duke Riveron. He accused him of using the island's beauty to make money and treating his daughters like commodities to sell in the marriage market. Leah fired back, saying she overheard Julian bad-mouthing her father. Julian remained unfazed, saying he'd apologize if she was genuinely offended. This just made Leah angrier, and she brought up how Julian had also made judgments about her appearance. But Julian stayed cool and collected, which only fueled Leah's rage even more. She stood up and started yelling, declaring there was no way they'd ever tie the knot. Julian smirked and told her he was glad to hear that. He even asked her to reject his proposal if he was ever forced to make one. He made it clear he'd never fall in love with someone like her either. The tension between them was insane. When Edmund found out what Julian had done to Leah, he was really disappointed in him. Sure, Julian achieved his goal of avoiding marriage, but Leah ended up with a raw deal. Her Majesty sent 2 other crappy guys as suitors, all to make Julian look good in comparison and be the chosen one for Leah. And poor Leah had no other way to find a husband except through this whole process. Edmund told Julian that if he hated being in that situation so much, he should have complained to Her Majesty instead of ruining an innocent lady's life just for his own selfish gain. What Julian did was pretty cowardly, and it finally sank in for him. He realized he was wrong and promised to apologize to Leah for his actions. The next day, Julian tried to say sorry to Leah, but she totally shut him down and wouldn't give him a chance to talk. He noticed how Leah was smiling at others, something he had never seen before since all he knew was her annoyed expression. When Leah caught him staring, she asked if he wanted to insult her some more. Julian quickly cleared things up, saying he just wanted to apologize and explained all the reasons behind his actions. including being forced into the whole marriage thing and using Leah to make her reject him. Surprisingly, Leah accepted his apology, which shocked Julian because he knew he must have hurt her a lot. Then, he made this awkward move by calling her by her name, and Leah snapped back, saying he had no right to address her like that. Julian immediately said sorry, not even understanding why he did that in the first place. Leah asked if there was anything else he wanted to say. Suddenly, Julian suggested they become friends and put the marriage issue aside. Leah was totally surprised by Julian's sudden declaration of wanting to be friends. He made it clear that despite his flaws, he genuinely liked her. But Leah pushed him away, reminding him that he had spoken badly of her before. Julian admitted he was wrong, complimented her beautiful eyes, and meant every word of it. Still, Leah said she had a condition. Julian was quick to agree, telling her she could criticize him all she wanted. However, Leah turned away and said there was nothing to criticize about his appearance. She even admitted he looked handsome. Julian's smile grew bigger, relieved that he didn't leave such a bad first impression after all. But Leah was quick to add that the good impression was ruined soon enough. Julian asked what condition she had in mind. Since he had been talking casually with her, Leah assumed he saw her as a friend, so she asked if she could talk to him like she does with her other friends. With a big smile, Julian agreed, and then Leah casually patted his shoulder, saying, "So, hey, Julian, see you tomorrow." And with that, she left. Julian was totally taken aback by Leah calling him out like that. Even his friend Edmund had never addressed him in that way. He hurriedly caught up to Leah and asked if the way he spoke made her uncomfortable. Leah admitted that it did and explained that she thought it would be fair if both of them talked more casually. Julian reassured her that he didn't mind if she did that and promised to speak more politely to her. Leah happily agreed with Julian's decision. The next day, in the lavender field, Julian was deep in thought, trying to figure out what Leah liked. Bella had to call out to him multiple times before he finally snapped out of it. He asked Bella what Leah might be into, and she told him that Leah was really into mystery novels lately. Julian thanked Bella and asked if he could go. He then went off to find some mystery novels for Leah and decided to write a letter along with the gift. In the letter, he expressed his gratitude for Leah for forgiving his rude behavior and said he got the books to celebrate their friendship. Julian couldn't help but wonder what Leah's reaction would be when she read the letter and got the books. Excited to meet Leah, Julian arrived early at the tea hall, only to find her looking unwell. He asked if she was okay, and she said she couldn't sleep because of the book he gave her. Julian's face lit up, and he asked if she had already read the books. From there, they got closer, discussing the books together. Leah even praised Julian, saying he was an excellent listener, and he returned the compliment, saying she was an eloquent speaker. They had a great time talking about how well Leah could tell stories, and suddenly Julian suggested that she should write her own book. But Leah's expression changed, and she told Julian that she had written some before. But women couldn't publish books. Her father had told her that when she was a kid. She knew it wasn't easy for women to publish books, especially after getting married, as no man would agree to his wife becoming an author. Out of nowhere, Julian came up with this crazy idea. Leah could write a book, and he would publish it under his name for her. Leah was taken aback and said Julian's future wife wouldn't like that. But Julian insisted he had no intention of getting married, so it shouldn't be a problem. Leah couldn't help but laugh at his reasoning. Then, Julian moved closer and suggested another wild idea. They could get married to avoid any objections. Leah took a moment to process it all and asked if Julian was proposing to her. They both burst out laughing together, realizing how absurd it sounded. Leah turned down the proposal, thanking him but explaining that he didn't even love her. But Julian shrugged it off, saying, "Love, schmoove." He thought love was overrated. Leah countered that love might not mean much to him, but it was way more important than her writing a book. Julian noticed Leah seemed like someone who had experienced love, but she proudly stated that she had only read about it in books. She even offered to lend Julian some romance novels to get a better understanding. Leah advised him not to propose to someone like that. So, Leah lent Julian a romance novel to read, and she told him to read it right away. They agreed to meet again the next day. It was quite a hilarious and unexpected turn of events. And so, the next day rolled in, and Julian was even more convinced that he didn't want anything to do with love after reading that romance novel. He thought love seemed like such a sad story, and he wanted no part of it. Leah smiled when she heard his thoughts, noticing that his eyes were still a bit red from reading. She kindly offered him her handkerchief to wipe his tears. As Julian strolled around Riveron by himself, he was lost in his thoughts, realizing it had been a week since the day he teared up while reading that book. Since then, they'd been talking about the novel whenever they had a chance. If someone saw them now, they'd think they were old pals, even though their first meeting was a disaster. But Leah forgave everything he did and treated him like a friend. Julian couldn't help but admire how smart she was, speaking her mind and all. Though sometimes she could be a bit messy too, which brought a smile to his face when he thought about it. He found Leah to be quite extraordinary. While walking, he passed by a dress shop that had this beautiful blue dress on display, catching his eye for a moment. In the carriage on his way back to the manor, Julian couldn't stop smiling as he held the paper bag with the dress he got for Leah. He couldn't wait to see her wearing it. But then, the rain started pouring down. When he reached the manor and went to the parlor, he expected Leah to be there. But she wasn't. Julian figured she must have gone back to her room since it was raining. Suddenly, Antoine walked in and told Julian that he had been taking a walk with Leah. He explained that she slipped and fell, so she went in to change her clothes and he was waiting for her in the parlor. Julian got worried and asked if Leah was hurt, but Antoine misunderstood, thinking Julian was asking about him. He assured Julian that he was fine, but Julian was actually concerned about Leah's condition. Julian couldn't shake off the awful feeling inside him. He then asked Antoine if he had a good time with Leah. Antoine smugly replied that he had a blast, saying it was super easy to please Leah, and she was just like any other girl. Hearing Antoine refer to Leah as that girl, Julian's expression turned serious, and he questioned those words. Antoine clarified that he meant Leah, and he was confident she would probably marry him. He even commented that he didn't understand what was so special about Leah's eyes and how she acted all high and mighty about it. Antoine added that Leah talked too much, and he wanted to find a way to make her keep her mouth shut. Before Antoine could continue speaking, Julian couldn't hold back his anger any longer and landed a punch on Antoine's face, effectively shutting him up. Antoine got furious and started yelling at Julian, asking why he was suddenly getting jealous just because Antoine had the money bag. Once again, he insulted Leah, calling her an easy girl. That only earned him another punch to the face from Julian. But before things got even more crazy, Leah burst into the room and shouted at them to stop. She didn't hold back and slapped Julian's face, scolding him for hurting others and reminding him that people feel pain when they get hit. She straight up told Julian to leave, saying she wouldn't marry him anyway. All Julian could do was apologize, feeling bad about the whole mess. He left the room saying he'd get going like she suggested because maybe it was better for him to leave the island soon. Antoine was about to say something, but suddenly he let out a loud scream. Leah was totally surprised when she stumbled upon her sisters, Jane and Lydia, the Riveron twins, hiding nearby. They were playing around when Julian and Antoine showed up. Jane and Lydia spilled the tea about the whole situation, how Antoine made that stupid comment about Leah being an easy girl, and then Julian jumped in and punched Antoine. Leah felt bad for slapping Julian without knowing what went down. So she dashed like crazy to catch up with Julian, who was walking in the rain. But, oh man, she ended up tripping and falling. Julian rushed over to her in a heartbeat. Leah spilled everything to him and apologized for slapping him. She asked him why he even bothered, as it had nothing to do with him. Julian got all serious and said, "Nah, it does matter because you're my friend." Leah picked herself up, telling Julian he shouldn't even think about leaving. She gave him the classic, "It's a friend's order" line. While Leah was chilling in her chamber, lost in a good book, her maid walked in, holding a bag and claiming it looked like something Leah might own. Leah checked it out and found a note from Julian inside. She couldn't believe her eyes when she opened the box. The dress was drop-dead gorgeous. She already had plans to rock it at the big ball coming up in 2 days. The big ball day finally arrived, and Julian was all ready and looking dashing in the hall. But he couldn't help feeling super excited to see Leah. When he turned around, he was absolutely blown away by how stunning she looked in the blue dress he gave her. He walked up to Leah, unable to contain his admiration, and told her she looked even more beautiful in that dress. Leah couldn't resist asking why he got her that dress in the first place. Julian confidently explained that it was a dress that suited her perfectly, and he felt like no one else could pull it off like she did. Leah, being curious as ever, asked why Julian had suddenly become so nice to her. He gave her presents, listened to all her stories, read the books she recommended, punched Antoine for her, and even took a slap from her. But despite it all, he kept telling her she was beautiful. She just had to know why Julian was acting that way toward her. With determination in his eyes, Julian boldly confessed that it was because he liked her. Leah wanted to be sure about what Julian said, so she asked for confirmation that he actually liked her. Julian stumbled a bit and said that's why they became friends. But Leah wasn't stopping there. She wanted to know if he got her the dress because he felt sorry for her. Julian clarified that he got it because he thought it would look amazing on her, and Edmund suggested buying beautiful things for a lady when she's feeling down. Then Leah threw a curveball and asked how one should apologize to a man. Julian gave her a sly smile and said a little smile and a kiss would do the trick. Of course, he got that gem of an idea from the romance novels Leah had lent him. Out of the blue, Lee went for it and planted a kiss on Julian's lips, totally catching him off guard. She flashed a big smile and told him that was her way of apologizing for slapping him. Julian's face turned all shades of red, and he was clearly flustered. But Leah wasn't done just yet. She asked if he would also apologize to her. Nervously, Julian leaned in closer to her, gently touching her face. As they were about to kiss, Leah's sisters barged into the hall, completely startling them both. Leah quickly turned away, her face now red and sweaty from the embarrassment. She glanced at Julian, wishing they could have had more alone time together. But the next day came, and Leah found herself all alone, with no sign of Julian at breakfast, lunch, or tea time. She felt so bummed out, wondering if Julian didn't like her anymore. Leah couldn't believe what went down. She was convinced that Julian had feelings for her, which emboldened her to go in for a kiss. But all of a sudden she spotted Julian's servant nearby, so she approached him and asked where Julian was. The servant disclosed that Julian had caught a bad cold and was resting in his room. Leah was shocked to hear that. Apparently, Julian had been out in the rain for 2 days leading up to the ball, which likely caused his illness. However, Leah's maid remembered something peculiar during those rainy days. She saw what appeared to be a person standing outside Leah's window, staring intently in her direction. With the servant's revelation, it seems that mystery person must have been Julian. Leah hurriedly rushed to Julian's room, looking all concerned. She burst into his room and called out his name. When Julian saw her, he smiled to reassure her. Still looking worried, Leah told him she heard he was sick. However, Julian's concern turned to noticing a scratch on Leah's face that she hadn't even noticed. She must have gotten scratched while running over to his room. Julian then invited her to sit on his bed, and while Leah nervously sat down, he took out a handkerchief, gently wiped her scratch, and then gave her a gentle kiss on the cheek. Leah was taken aback and asked him why he did that. Julian playfully replied that it was his way of apologizing for not showing up yesterday. Leah helped Julian lie down and said sorry for disturbing his rest. She asked if she could leave, but as she got up, Julian held her hand and told her not to go. He was worried she might get another scratch, so he offered to accompany her back after a little while. Leah couldn't resist agreeing, and she placed her hand on Julian's forehead, saying it reminded her of a childhood memory. When she was a kid and very sick, she once heard a noise that seemed like her father entering her room and placing his hand on her forehead until she fell asleep. However, she wasn't sure if it was real because her father was never that caring. He wasn't interested in his daughters and would often yell at her mother. Despite all that, whenever Leah thought about his hand on her forehead, she couldn't fully hate him. Julian opened up about his father, revealing that he wasn't so different from Leah's father. He recounted a trip they once took, staying at a count's estate. During the trip, his parents got into a massive fight that led his father to storm out of the estate while his mother returned home that very day. Julian was left completely unnoticed and forgotten by both of them. It took a full 2 weeks for a servant to finally come looking for him. Apparently, his parents hadn't even realized they left him behind for more than a week. Suddenly, Julian blurted out that Duke Riveron was one lucky guy to have a daughter as amazing as Leah. He confessed that she would have had much better suitors if it weren't for him. Her Majesty sent those guys her way, but they were no match for her. Julian felt bad about it, but at the same time, he was grateful because it brought him the chance to meet her and see her beautiful smile. However, just as he was about to say something more, his eyes closed and he dozed off to sleep. The next day, Julian showed up in full health for the dinner feast. Turns out, during the stormy night, someone spotted Antoine leaving the Riveron estate. And as for Count Rosamond, it seemed like he backed off from courting Leah once he realized things were looking good for Julian. As they strolled hand in hand, Lee suddenly brought up the story Julian had shared about his father. She told him that memories could be rewritten, and she wanted him to forget that painful memory from now on. Instead, she created a new memory for him, one where his father, although busy and distant during the day, always made time for evening walks with his mother, just like they were doing now. She added that his father would lovingly hug his mother whenever she asked for it. To demonstrate, Lee suggested Julian try hugging her that way. As Julian embraced Leah, he couldn't help but wonder if she was trying to comfort him. Lee assured him that from now on, whenever anyone asked, he should tell them that his father was a kind person who loved him dearly. In that moment, Julian realized that Leah genuinely cared for him from the depths of her heart. Leah reassured Julian that he was capable of loving someone too. Julian couldn't help but smile, thinking to himself how wonderful Leah was. Suddenly, he asked her to wait for a moment and rushed off. When he returned, he got down on one knee, took Leah's hand, and kissed it. With a ring in his hand, he proposed to her. Julian confessed that he had caught a fever from thinking about her all day and how worried he was when he couldn't see her even for a moment. He expressed his desire to be with her every day, to hear her chat and even scold him if needed. Meeting Leah had inspired him to become a better person, and now he couldn't imagine losing her to anyone else. He declared that he couldn't live without her and pleaded with her to save him by marrying him. Leah immediately accepted Julian's proposal without hesitation, saying she would marry him. But just when Julian felt relieved and overjoyed, Leah added that there was something she wanted to do before they got married. Confidently, Julian asked what it was, and with a beaming smile, Leah said she wanted to sleep with him first before tying the knot. Julian was absolutely freezing when he heard Leah's request to sleep with him. Leah spilled that she wanted to do that with the person she's head over heels for before they tie the knot. Then, she dropped the bombshell on Julian to swing by her room around midnight tonight, and that left Julian totally speechless. Back in his room, Julian hopped in the shower the moment he got there and started mulling over what he should do next. It wasn't that he wasn't interested, but his shyness was off the charts. So, he opted for a stroll outside before making his way to Leah's room. Yet, almost without realizing, he ended up right outside Leah's door, and he couldn't tell if it was midnight yet. Brimming with uncertainty, Julian nudged the window open, gave a soft shout for Leah, and lo and behold, Leah popped up from the bathtub, catching Julian off guard and turning him beet red. Leah still hadn't noticed she was showing everything. The moment she realized, she let out a scream and dumped herself underwater to hide. With cheeks as rosy as ripe strawberries, Leah questioned why Julian was so early and that she hadn't finished her soak yet. Inch by inch, Julian edged closer to the tub, expressing his gratitude for Leah's earlier courage and admitted he would forever cherish this memory. Leaning in, he confessed his love for Leah. After that wild night, Julian and Leah took their sweet time savoring each other's company and threw a huge wedding bash. By late September, Julian and Leah's carriage pulled up at Ranel estate. Leah was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement about her new digs. But once she stepped inside, all she found was this dark, gloomy mansion. So, being the go-getter she is, Leah turned to Julian and told him they needed to give the place a serious makeover. In less than 3 years, that towering, desolate Ranel manor morphed into a straight-up beauty. Even though the place got a facelift, Julian and Leah's love held steady, no doubt. Yet, here's the rub. There was one little hiccup that kept nagging at them. One day, Julian got wind that Leah had taken a tumble again, and it definitely wasn't her first rodeo. Julian looked pretty darn worried when he aired his concerns, which in turn left Leah feeling all sorts of blue. Turns out, these two were like polar opposites when it came to their personalities. Julian and Leah were like two totally different puzzle pieces. Maybe they should have clued in on that back when they first crossed paths and had that epic showdown. But their love was so crazy strong that they were totally blind to it. Whenever Leah ended up hurt or something, Julian's default mode was getting all fired up at her, claiming it's because he's worried sick. But all Leah really wanted was for Julian to put a bit of sweetness into his words. Caught in the crossfire of their arguments, Leah's maid Judy couldn't help but feel bad for her. One day, just like any other, Julian and Leah were at it again. Julian was barking orders at Leah like it was his day job, and Leah just couldn't bite her tongue anymore. She straight up told Julian to cool it with the attitude. But, Julian, he just cut it short, mid-sentence. Leah was trying to pour her heart out. All she wanted was Julian to put a bit of sugar in his words, especially because his mad voice really freaked her out. Julian, though, was all about defusing the situation. He called for a ceasefire, telling Leah to just drop it. And that right there lit Leah's fuse even more. She figured Julian was the one who sparked the fight, only to snuff it out halfway through the conversation. So, in a blaze of anger, she stormed out of the room like a tornado. In her room, Leah just let the floodgates open. Tears were streaming down her face while Judy, her trusty sidekick, tried to be a shoulder to cry on. Through her sobs, Leah spilled how Julian's words had stung like crazy. She gave props to Julian for actually caring, but she put it out there that a spoonful of nice words wouldn't hurt. It wasn't that she was all sunshine and rainbows, it's just that the coldness between her and Julian was getting to be too much. She missed him, darn it. So, she decided to take the high road and be the first to patch things up with an apology. Judy couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Leah. It always seemed like Leah was the one making the first move to smooth things over. And let's be real, she wasn't wrong. Julian never exactly led the parade of apologies. Because of Leah's tendency to be clumsy whenever she limped back home with an injury, Julian's fuse would either light up like a bonfire or he'd turn frosty as an ice cube. And boy, those reactions hurt Leah real bad, which in turn would ignite her own temper, launching them into a full-blown showdown. However, Leah wasn't cut out for silence. She couldn't stand the quiet treatment, so their tiffs usually fizzled out within a day. Julian, on the other hand, was cut from a different cloth. He needed his alone time to cool down. Otherwise, he'd just end up hurting Leah even more. Leah tapped on Julian's door, took a deep breath, and walked in. She spilled that she was done with the whole fight and just wanted them to get back on track. She straight up asked for a hug and a kiss. But Julian, he just clammed up. His eyes were all over the place, anywhere but on her. Thing is, even though he was dying to pull her close and plant one on her, the words just wouldn't come out. Finally, Julian broke the silence. He gave her hands a gentle squeeze and mumbled that he was doing his darn best. He requested Leah to give him a little space until he could get his head straight. But let's be real, patience wasn't exactly Leah's strong suit. If Julian kept his lips zipped, she'd start to get all jittery and eventually cave in, offering up an apology just to break the ice. But in her heart of hearts, she also wished that Julian would be the one to throw out an apology every now and then. After each fight, Julian had this routine of serving up milk with syrup to Leah, and they'd crash after patching things up. But, no surprise, the next week would roll around and they'd be back to squabbling like clockwork. Their clashes were pretty short-lived, mostly because they were like two different planets colliding, but the constant back and forth was draining the heck out of them. Then came the day when Leah decided their room needed a facelift. She spilled her plans to Julian, and he offered to send in some beefy servants to help with the heavy lifting. So he told her to just sit tight until the cavalry arrived. Well, turns out that plan went a bit sideways. Instead of finding a room-transforming squad, Julian stumbled upon Leah, nursing a bump on her head and a sea of scattered books. Her explanation? She was attempting to clear out the bookshelf. And like clockwork, Julian's fuse got lit. He went off on Leah, looking as mad as a hornet because she hadn't listened to his advice. In that moment, Leah went from determined to shocked. Julian's anger caught her off guard, and he realized he'd crossed a line when he saw how shaken she was. Yet Leah didn't hold back her disappointment. She straight up asked Julian why he had to blow up like that. Julian's emotions were all tangled up. He regretted his outburst, but he felt stuck, like he couldn't move. Just as Leah was about to say sorry, he cut her off, deep inside knowing that Leah had a history of being accident-prone. He didn't want her taking the blame, yet he still pulled the "let's talk about this later" card. Leah, though, wasn't having it. She straight up demanded a hug from Julian, wanting to mend the bridge between them. But Julian, he kept evading her eyes and wouldn't give her an ounce of response. Man, that hit Leah right in the gut, and before you knew it, she shoved him and walked away, leaving Julian standing there. She didn't hold back, letting him have it, saying she flat out hated him. It was pouring outside, and Julian was starting to get really concerned about Leah. He searched the entire manor, but Leah was nowhere in sight. Then, like a lightning bolt, he spotted her standing out in the rain. Julian wasted no time. He hurried over to Leah, wearing his worry on his sleeve, and questioned her about what on earth she was doing out there. Leah didn't hold back. She laid it all out for Julian, how she'd asked him not to lose his temper, but he did it anyway. And how when she wanted them to patch things up, he turned his back. When she was ready to talk, he wasn't. It was like a chain reaction that just made her more and more frustrated. Julian was beating himself up, trying to figure out why he kept hurting her like this. He moved closer, told her that if she could cut him some slack for a bit, he'd eventually come around with an apology and a hug. But Leah wasn't having any of it. Waiting around? Not her style. Julian finally swallowed his pride and apologized. He let her know he'd do things her way. And then, he coaxed her inside, urging her to come closer so he could finally embrace her. That's the deal with people in this world. Some want to hash it out after a fight, while others need some solo time. And that was the Lee and Julian dynamic in a nutshell. As Julian held Lee tight, he made a promise, right from his heart, to never let her stand alone in the rain again. Deep down, he was kicking himself for everything he'd put her through. But that wasn't the end of the story. In the dead of night, Julian was roused from his slumber and found Leah burning up with a high fever. Julian fetched the doctor to check on Leah, and luckily, it was nothing serious, just a regular cold. The prescription? Rest, plain and simple. And rest she did, with Julian playing the part of the dedicated bedside companion. Amidst her recovery, Leah spilled her heart out. She confessed that whenever they'd butt heads, she'd get these feelings like maybe she should just walk away. That's why she was all about making things right pronto, fearing that Julian might be feeling the same way, and she didn't want that at all. Julian, though, shot that notion down fast. He looked her in the eyes and made it clear she was the one and only in his book. He wasn't going anywhere. Leah opened up that her worries were pretty much baseless and that she'd put an end to those kinds of thoughts. She gave her word that she wouldn't let herself go down that rabbit hole again. Fast forward a week, and Bella swung by for a visit. Leah was on the mend, feeling heaps better. Time just flew by, and before they knew it, Bella was ready to hit the road. Julian thought Leah was on the upswing too. Sadly, though, the tables turned. Leah's condition took a nosedive, and the verdict was in pneumonia. They pulled out all the stops, tried every medicine in the book, but nothing seemed to make a dent. If anything, Leah just kept getting worse. In that moment, Leah felt like her time was slipping away. She let it all out, worrying about Julian being all alone if she passed away. She was beating herself up for that rainy day, standing out there like she did. She even told Julian he should get hitched again after she was gone, to live a happy life. But Julian couldn't take it. Tears were streaming down his face as he begged Leah not to leave. He made promises, swore he wouldn't just shut down during their fights, and he'd always lend an ear and hold her whenever she needed. Leah's lips curled into a smile as she heard that. She asked for a hug from Julian, and he obliged. While Julian held her close, Leah whispered about the walnut tree. The one where he'd given her a hug that she'd never forget. She wanted him to take care of that tree, as it would be a reminder of her. But then her smile slowly faded and she let out her final breath, leaving Julian to sob in sorrow. In the winter of 1776, Leah Riveron died at the age of 20. Her cause of death was severe fever and difficulty breathing due to pneumonia. With her body already compromised by the biting cold, it simply couldn't endure any longer. Her passing was swift and unexpected. Over the passing years, Julian held onto Leah's memory tightly, her body resting on that same bed. The manor slowly emptied as even the servants couldn't bear being around a corpse any longer. But Julian, well, he just couldn't shake off Leah's presence, not even after hitting 40. He kept his word, tending to the walnut tree and grabbing those walnuts as they ripened, just like he promised. It was like some sort of bizarre enchantment had taken hold of him. The idea of dying seemed to be off limits for Julian, as if Leah's memory itself kept him bound to the world. He couldn't erase her from his thoughts. As he laid down, he called out to Leah, expressing how much he missed her, and even begged to see her in his dreams. Julian blinked open his eyes, only to be hit with a jolt of surprise. There was Her Majesty, and beside her, a portrait of Bella. It felt like a throwback to the very first time Her Majesty had summoned him. Julian figured he must be in some dreamland, but man, he was over the moon at the idea of reuniting with Leah. He wasted no time and agreed to Her Majesty's request to head over to Riveron. Yet, something felt off. It was too vivid, too real. And then, it hit him like a ton of bricks. This was no dream. He realized that he was en route to Riveron as Bella's potential match. When Julian came face to face with Bella, he didn't beat around the bush. He flat out spilled the beans about his past and the future he was privy to. He told Bella not to waste her time with him since she was destined to marry Duke Jamie Arel. Plus, he dropped the bomb that he was the guy who would end up marrying her younger sister, Leah. Bella kept her cool, not batting an eye at this revelation. She shot back by asking Julian why he was sharing all this with her. Julian's response? He straight up told her he wanted to see Leah again. And wouldn't you know it, the young Leah was right there, giving Julian a warm welcome. She was about 14 years old then, but she hadn't lost an ounce of her usual cheer and boldness. She even threw out a playful comment about wanting to marry a handsome man like him someday. Right then and there, Julian dropped down on one knee, popping the big question, would she marry him when she hit 17 and officially became a young lady? Leah couldn't help but break into a smile, and without skipping a beat, she whisked Julian away to her hidden spot. His eyes practically popped out of his head as she showed him this secret garden she was keeping under wrap. She revealed that she'd been planting a bunch of flower seeds there, and they were due to bloom in about 3 years' time. Julian returned that smile and gave her his word that he'd be right there with her in 3 years' time. After that, Julian headed back to the capital city. He put a big grin on the Queen's face when he spilled that he was tying the knot in 3 years. Once he was back at his estate, he went all out. First things first, he knocked down the entire building. Those towering walls of the ducal manor? He chopped them down to a safe level to make sure no one would go tumbling off. And get this, he constructed the entire place using oak trees, which kept the place cozy even in the chilliest winters. He took a page from Leah's book, decking out every nook and cranny just the way she liked. He even went ahead and put together a library, painting it up in her favorite colors. And as if that wasn't enough, he wrangled up some sorcerers to conjure up a magical garden. The whole shebang took about 3 years to pull off. Edmund was right there beside Julian as they wandered around. He just couldn't wrap his head around the fact that Julian had gone head over heels and decided to tie the knot after just one look. And get this, they were on their way to a dress shop. Edmund raised an eyebrow, totally baffled about why Julian would need yet another dress. I mean, how many does a person need, right? But Julian had a quick answer up his sleeve. He let Edmund in on the scoop that the dress she had her heart set on was up for grabs right there. And wouldn't you know it, it was this light blue silk beauty. And so Leah totally said yes to Julian's proposal, since she had hit 17. While they were strolling together, Leah asked how Julian could have popped the question the first time they met, when she was just 14 back then. She wondered if he had a thing for younger girls. Julian cracked up at that and said that whether she was 30, 40, or even older, he would have still asked her to marry him because it was like he was meant to be with her. Julian and Leah ended up tying the knot as if it was their destiny. They were always full of joy. Even when Leah turned 20, she was still in great health, despite Julian's worries. Then the next summer rolled around and Leah was out gardening. Almost like it was destined. She got struck by lightning right in the middle of the day, leaving Julian all by himself once more. Although Julian did everything he could to keep Leah safe, constantly peeking out the window to keep an eye on her, he couldn't stop a lightning bolt from striking down from the sky. In the midst of his overwhelming grief, he couldn't figure out what had gone awry, even though no one was at fault this time. Once the funeral was over, Julian headed out to the border for battle. He even joined the Second Imperial War the following year and managed to lead the Hardy Kingdom to victory. Miraculously, he made it through to the very end. Despite being the one who probably wanted to meet his end in battle the most, he somehow managed to survive. After many seasons had come and gone, Julian found himself harvesting walnuts countless times until he hit the age of 40. Once again, he was summoned by Her Majesty to the same place. Julian explained that he needed some time to get things ready, so he asked Her Majesty to call him back there 3 years down the line. Julian went all out renovating the manor, just like he did in his previous life. Since it wasn't his first rodeo, it took less time this time around. He had a whole year before he had to head to Riveron Island, so he decided to make a beeline for the island. He hopped on his horse, all the while thinking about how he should spill the beans to Leah to prevent the tragedy from happening. He was pretty sure Leah might even find the whole story fascinating, and that could set them up to get married again and enjoy some more time together. Once he reached Riveron, he wasted no time in tracking down Leah. To his astonishment, she was wearing the very same blue dress that he was supposed to have bought for her. As soon as Leah laid eyes on Julian, she looked utterly puzzled, throwing out "Who are you?" And as she came closer, Julian's tears started flowing like there was no tomorrow. Leah did her best to console him, asking if he was all right, but that just seemed to make Julian cry even harder. Julian had ridden his horse day and night to reach Leah, but when he finally saw her, he couldn't bring himself to say any of the things he had planned. He realized that the Leah standing in front of him, with her youthful and radiant face, her eyes all lit up from the blue dress, would fade away if she married him. So, in this third iteration of Julian's life, he made the tough call not to marry Leah. A year rolled by, and when the Queen called for Julian again, he flat out turned down the whole marriage idea. But out of the blue, a guard burst in and dropped the bombshell that Leah had gone missing. Julian was completely caught off guard, but he managed to hold his ground, sticking to his decision of not marrying Leah, even though the Queen suggested sending guards to look for her. In this go-around, Julian made up his mind not to cross paths with Leah anymore, but he still had this itch to know how she was holding up. So, he dispatched a guard to do a little detective work on Leah. It turns out that Leah was chilling in a Viscounty, spending her days penning novels and even getting them out under the Viscountess's name. Julian was over the moon that he could actually read Leah's stories, those romance tales she always wanted to spin. But then, as he dug into the novels, he stumbled upon a line, "To the man with kind black eyes." That hit him like a ton of bricks, making him ponder whether that brief moment they shared was somehow tied up in this. Sadly, though, history repeated itself and a tragedy unfolded. Leah's carriage crashed, and she met her end in the river. So that's the whole deal behind the writing on that huge board in the secret room that Lee peeked into. And now, Leah just couldn't wrap her head around the fact that Julian had gone through that saga a whopping 242 times. Yet he still managed to keep his cool. Julian laid it out that, eventually, time would loop back, and he would cross paths with Leah again. Waiting didn't seem all that hard to him. Learning all this, Leah fought back her tears, trying to keep her emotions in check. Julian, being the stand-up guy he is, comforted her by emphasizing that what truly mattered was they were reunited. All of a sudden, Leah went rigid, and Julian called out to her, concerned. Once she collected herself, she shot Julian a question. Was that why he had kept the room hidden from her all along? And then it clicked for her that he must have spilled this story before too. But here comes the real shocker. Julian revealed that Leah was the one who wrote the very first part in that very room. Back in the old days, there was this room that got handed over to the palace sorcerer. You know how it goes with those ancient manors, they always had these kinds of nooks. Even after they booted out the sorcerers, those rooms were left alone, just in case there was some leftover magic stuff hiding in there. Julian went on to break down the room situation. Initially, it had a tall ceiling with this vintage chandelier, and Leah was fond of hanging out there. But things went downhill in Julian's 73rd life when the ceiling caved in and took Leah with it. So in his next shot at life, Julian downsized the room as much as possible. But the kicker was, the room was enchanted, which meant all of Leah's belongings in there remained untouched, even her scribbles on the board, even though in Julian's next life. And because of this, Julian became convinced that whoever had cast that magic might hold the key to ending his endless cycle of lives. He hit up his butler for info on the sorcerer who once occupied that space. Turns out, the sorcerer's name was Callian Aldman. Wrap your head around this. It took 312 years for Julian to finally track down Callian. The crazy part, Callian had been hanging out in the Raenal duchy this entire time. So, Julian entered Callian's place, and Callian greeted him with a quip about Julian outlasting even him. After recounting his entire story to Callian, Julian cut right to the chase, asking how to save Leah. But Callian shot him down, explaining that certain parts couldn't be changed. Julian, however, didn't lose hope. He pointed out that every time he came back, something was different, so he didn't buy that it was set in stone. He also wondered why he was the only one going through all this. Callian clarified that it wasn't because Julian had done anything particularly wrong or special. Someone had just cast a spell on him for kicks. Julian had simply stumbled upon a lady destined for an early demise, and he ended up mourning her every single time she passed away. Frustration gnawed at Julian, and he started to think he was stuck with this cursed existence. Then Callian threw a question at him. If he found a way to break the cycle, would Julian be willing to let go of that lady? Without skipping a beat, Julian agreed, no hesitation. If it meant Leah could have a longer life, he was all in. Callian laid out his instructions. Once Julian and Leah were married, he should bring her to see him. That lit a spark of hope in Julian's heart. So Julian brought Leah to meet Callian like he promised. She seemed to have a blast, checking out everything like a kid in a toy store. Callian even took them up to the attic, which was filled with loads of magic books. While Leah was hunting for books to borrow, Callian showed Julian a note tucked in his drawer. The note hinted at a way to break the bond between Julian and Leah, and Callian urged Julian to hand over the note in their next life. In that life, Julian dove deep into magic studies and cherished moments with Leah until her passing. Julian's 193rd life wasn't much different from the previous ones, except now he held on to Callian's note. This time, he returned the note to Callian, who still questioned if Julian's feelings for Leah were love or obsession. Julian stood his ground, confidently affirming that it was love. Despite having been through countless lifetimes with Leah, the excitement of seeing her remained. Callian advised Julian to relish his time with Leah and find happiness in their togetherness, rather than fixating on saving or shielding her. With newfound determination, Julian approached the Queen, requesting permission to head to Riveron, even though it was 3 years earlier. However, fate played its tricks again. The news arrived that Duke Riveron had received a letter stating that the next magic summer was postponed by 6 years. Leah's anticipated magic summer got messed up since Julian popped the question 3 years ahead of schedule. But now she's pointing fingers at him and giving him the cold shoulder in Riveron instead of the warm welcome he deserved. Julian took a shot at talking to 14-year-old Leah, making a deal that he'd stick around for 3 years, being her sidekick. If, by some chance, she didn't catch feelings for him, he'd peace out from Riveron. He spilled the beans that he had a crush on Leah, and it would be a dream come true if she felt the same. Leah was all kinds of confused by Julian's confidence that she wouldn't shoot him down after 3 years. Julian just cracked up, saying she'd eventually swoon for him. Getting pretty fed up, Leah asked if Julian was done with his spiel, threatening to walk away. But as she headed out, Julian tailed her, explaining he was just playing the role of her escort, which only cranked her irritation up another notch. It's been over a year since Julian showed up on Riveron Island. Leah got used to Julian walking her to her room every day. Even the maids thought they might be a thing. But Leah didn't really pay attention to it. The maids teased that Leah looked smitten, but she wasn't sure if she was into Julian like that. They even suggested she should make a move, like touch him, to figure out her feelings. So the next time she bumped into Julian, still being her bold self, she straight up asked Julian to spend the night with her. Julian was pretty surprised that Leah was still as daring as ever. He fired back and asked if she had feelings for him. Leah got all jittery and admitted she wasn't sure, which is why she suggested the whole sleeping together thing to sort out her emotions. Out of the blue, Julian gave Leah a quick peck on the cheek, making her all flustered. Julian assured her that it was cool if she wasn't in love with him yet, and she should take all the time she needs. After that day, they kicked it up a notch. They started holding hands, and Julian would plant these gentle kisses on Leah's cheeks after walking her to her room at night. Those might seem like small moves, but they were enough to give young Leah's heart a serious jolt. As time rolled on, Leah hit the big 1-6 this year. One day, while she was chilling with her tea in the garden, Julian was nowhere to be found. She wondered why he wasn't doing his usual thing. Her maid spilled the tea that there were rumors about some shady character hanging around in town, so Julian probably dipped to patrol and keep things safe. Leah wasn't totally sold on that story, so she decided not to just sit around. Instead, she took matters into her own hands and headed out to track him down. Leah and her maid were just casually strolling through town, on the hunt for Julian without any backup. Leah, true to her nature, got totally distracted by all the delicious smells from the food joints around. Julian happened to be in the vicinity and spotted Leah wandering around solo, which got him all worked up. He shouted out to her. But guess what? There was some shady character sneaking up behind Leah, armed with a dagger and all. Just in the nick of time, Julian leaped into action, taking the hit meant for Leah and getting himself injured in the process. After that crazy incident, Leah paid Julian a visit while he was recuperating. Then, when Leah hit 17, they decided to tie the knot. In this new chapter, Leah's lifespan seemed to stretch a bit, and they even had a little bundle of joy named Delphina. Life was moving along until that fateful day. Leah and Delphina were planning to swing by Riveron, but Julian had a bunch of work he just couldn't ditch. He was stressed out about them going alone. Really wished he could tag along. Finally, when he wrapped up his chores, he hopped on his trusty steed and galloped to Riveron. But what he found there was beyond heartbreaking. His beloved wife and daughter gone in a fiery tragedy. Julian was utterly shattered, putting the blame on himself for what went down with Leah and Delphina. He was at the end of his rope, couldn't bear to carry on. So every time he woke up in front of Her Majesty, like before, he'd off himself. But no matter what he did, he'd just end up back in the same spot. Nothing could break the cycle. So, he followed Her Majesty's orders and headed back to Riveron Island just like before. Arrived there, he wasted no time and straight up asked to meet Leah, the fourth daughter of Riveron. But guess what? Plot twist! Leah wasn't there, and the fourth daughter of Riveron wasn't her. Talk about a curveball. Confused as heck, he bounced back to Ranel estate and beelined to Callion's spot. Callion laid it all out. Every action has consequences. And if one person's life gets all messed up and reversed, someone else has to fill that gap. In a nutshell, All those times Julian offed himself had a price. Leah's vanishing act. In simple terms, if he wanted to see Leah again, he had to put a cork in the dying part. Callian had a thought. What if Julian tried to be a hero and save someone who was destined to kick the bucket? Maybe, just maybe, that could glue the world back to its old shape. In one of those memories that Julian lost track of, seriously, he couldn't even count how many, he turned into quite the hero. He was like a one-man rescue squad, saving folks left and right. Little accidents, big battles, you name it. Thanks to Julian's intervention, tons of people dodged bad luck. He just kept on keeping on like a robot on autopilot until he hit the ripe old age of 40. And then, like a man on a mission, he came back yet again. All aboard the horse and off to Riveron, because he couldn't wait a second longer to catch sight of Leah in his life once more. And finally, it happened. He stumbled into a world where Leah was living and breathing. But he didn't stop there. Nope. He headed straight back to his digs and ordered his butler to track down Callian. In this life, Julian brought Callian to his manor and showed him the secret room. He then laid it all out and told Callian that he was ready to put a stop to this endless loop, once and for all. Julian was beyond ticked off, and he straight up pleaded with Callian to lend a hand in putting an end to his never-ending existence. Seeing Julian's agony, Callian didn't need to say a darn thing. Instead, he just pulled him in for a big, comforting hug. Julian decided to throw a big feast for Callian. And during this shindig, he went all out and handed Callian the famous Ranel peach. He spilled the backstory about it. Apparently, munching on this peach was rumored to gift you with a seriously lengthy life. But here's the kicker. Julian's mom had banned him from even touching the peaches from that orchard. So, as tempting as it was, Julian could only watch from a distance. But after his mom passed on, the orchard owner brought Julian a peach each year he returned to his life. They did it right until they had to chop down the peach tree, as per Julian's mom's wishes before she passed away. But, in the moment, the orchard owner pleaded with Julian to try one just this once, emphasizing it could grant him a long, long life. Back then, Julian was a mere 20-year-old, and he caved. Now, in this new twist of life, Julian figured he didn't need all that longevity anymore. So, he passed the peach torch to Callian, like, "Here you go, buddy." Listening to Julian's tale, Callian was pretty bummed out. He straight up told Julian that he should just toss that peach away. But then Callian dropped a bombshell. That very peach was the root cause of Julian's eternal life loop. Well, you can imagine Julian was totally caught off guard and demanded Callian to give him the lowdown. Okay, here's how it all went down. It kicked off with this lady swinging by and buying a love potion from Callian. Now, back in the day, word on the street was that Duke Raenal was all set to marry the Queen's sister, even though he was head over heels for someone else. Callian cooked up this theory that the lady who bought the potion was the Queen's sis. But that love potion wouldn't do squat for someone who was already swooning for someone else. Bummer, right? So, Julian's mom made a pit stop at Callian's joint again. She had this wild idea. She wanted Callian to work some mojo on the peach tree that Duke Raenal held super dear. The plan was to cook up a spell that would give whoever munched on those peaches a one-way ticket to eternal life. She spun this whole story about how if someone's existence kept looping, they might eventually forget their old flame and start fancying her. But that's not all. She was after another spell too. This one was a doozy. She wanted anyone who loved the person that gobbled up those enchanted peaches to croak no matter what. Callian fessed up to turning down Julian's mom's request. However, considering the bizarre command she gave after Julian's dad passed away, like chopping down all the trees and chucking out all the fruits, it seemed like some dark magic mojo was at play. Basically, the whole mess was due to this cursed magic stuff. So Callian advised Julian to ditch the peach and assured him that the cycle wouldn't repeat. Julian then told his butler to toss the peaches and axe the tree. So Julian was left with only one option: no more peach chow for him. But he decided to give the peach to Leah instead, hoping she'd have a long and joyful life. Julian was hip to the fact that if Leah fell for him, it was game over for him, and she'd bear the brunt of the pain. So, he made sure Leah ate the peach but didn't fall head over heels for him. Yet when Leah's third life rolled around, Julian just couldn't resist being with her. So, with Julian laying it all out, Leah finally got where he was coming from. She had his back, reassuring him that in all his past lives when she bit the dust, not a single regret would have crossed her mind. Meeting someone she loved that deeply meant no regrets, even if it all ended in a final curtain call. Yet, in this current round of life, Leah was dead set against Julian meeting his maker. She let out a sigh of relief, knowing she hadn't wolfed down the peach, she'd just tasted the juice from Julian's hand. As far as she was concerned, it didn't count as eating it. Julian also spilled that he wasn't ready to throw in the towel when he caught sight of Leah in that stunning blue dress. That was the moment he locked in his decision to make Leah his better half once again. Julian and Leah were like the king and queen of happiness in the whole kingdom. But as their popularity soared, it sparked some serious envy in the folks around them. People were spreading rumors left and right, claiming that ever since the Raenal and Riveron families teamed up, they had become a force to be reckoned with, so much so that the hardy kingdom felt threatened. Julian, though, was certain that the queen would never buy into that gossip. Even though Julian and Leah had their fair share of worries and down moments, those were just like tiny bumps in the road for them. The important part was that they were overall content. As long as they stuck together, their happiness was pretty much guaranteed to endure. Leah's 37th birthday was in full swing, and they were en route to Riveron Island for her birthday bash and a rekindling of their wedding vows. At that moment, Leah was overflowing with gratitude for everything. But out of the blue, their journey came to an abrupt halt. The Montez family, buying into those darn untrue stories, launched a surprise attack. Chaos erupted, and before they knew it, their carriage was ablaze. Julian sprang into action, pulling Leah from the carriage, but then trouble found them in the form of an arrow aimed their way. Julian's instinct was to shield Leah, and in the process, he was hit by a barrage of arrows. As he breathed his last, all he could see was Leah bawling her eyes out. Even though Julian couldn't have foreseen such a fate, he took comfort in the fact that he had lived a long, fulfilling life alongside Leah. His parting words were a wish for her ongoing happiness and to find him again. In the embrace of his wife, Duke Julian Raenal passed away at the age of 42. He had lived a life filled with joy. 2 years had gone by since Leah cut herself off from the world. Before that, she used to mingle with folks right after Julian's passing, as part of trying to honor the happy life he wished for her. Staying cooped up at home was just too much for her to handle. However, the people she met out there were real pieces of work. They kept trying to set Leah up with their relatives, some of whom were said to have tempers like a bull. Leah couldn't help but wonder why these folks were still alive when Julian was gone. But Leah wasn't having any of it. She turned down those offers left and right, insisting that Julian would find a way to come back to her. That's when the rumors began flying around the city, saying that she'd lost her marbles. Since that moment, Leah had steered clear of any social events or get-togethers. Leah pretty much camped out in the spot where she and Julian had shared their life together. She'd replay those memories over and over, fingers crossed that she'd gobbled down that darn peach. The truth was, she couldn't quite remember whether she'd taken a bite or not, but she held on to the hope that she had. Bella kept shooting her letters, checking in on her and giving a heads up about her upcoming birthday in June. So, taking that as a nudge, Leah made up her mind to swing by Riveron. But the journey itself was pretty uneventful. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on her way to the island. Leah spilled all the beans to Bella. The whole peach saga. Her sense that life had reached its full circle, and that continuing on felt a bit meaningless. Bella, being the worrywart she was, didn't press Leah but instead extended an invitation for Leah to join in on her birthday festivities. So, the entire clan got together. Parents, sisters, nieces, nephews, and those adorable kids who brought to mind Delphina, Julian and Leah's daughter, a character Leah had only encountered through Julian's tales. Later that night, Leah's sisters barged into her room, declaring they were having a sleepover. Bella tried to reassure Leah that things would look up soon. Deep down, Leah knew there was a decent chance she hadn't chomped down on that peach. Still, she held on to hope. Hope that, when shaped by memory, might just turn into something real. The next morning, sunlight streaming in, Bella greeted Leah with a cheerful birthday wish. Without missing a beat, Leah sprang into action, leaving Bella perplexed by her newfound morning enthusiasm at the ripe age of 17. Racing outside, she called out to Julian, who was clutching the peach. Amidst tears, Leah shared her story of trying the Ranel peach. Julian was bewildered. She went on mentioning the walnut tree, which left Julian visibly shocked. And just like that, after all they'd been through, they reunited. A future of endless time lay ahead, where they knew they'd be side by side forever. With Leah's sisters in town, they were all having a blast together. However, things took a turn when Beth brought up an eyebrow-raising question. As Leah raved about her amazing hubby, Beth wondered if there was even one tiny thing Leah wasn't totally thrilled about. Those words got stuck in Leah's head, making her feel all kinds of uneasy. In her hunt for Julian, Leah stumbled upon his secret room. Julian was totally into this hideout, where they'd stored keepsakes from their past lives. While Julian was digging it, Leah was starting to get ticked off that he seemed to be spending more time there. Back in their room, Julian noticed that Leah was still wide awake and couldn't help but express his concern. Out of nowhere, Leah blurted out a request. She wondered if they could just get rid of the secret room. It was like she was feeling a bit jealous of her own self in Julian's undisclosed past lives. Seeing Julian lost in thoughts about lives she had no knowledge of somehow got under her skin. Julian quickly caught on to her emotions and offered a comforting explanation. He understood her feelings and clarified that those lives she didn't know about were actually filled with her presence. Following that day, they began a routine of visiting the secret room daily to chat about the stuff in there. Even though the stories often carried a touch of sadness, there was an undercurrent of happiness running through them. Leah even had a unique hope that when they grew old and approached the end of their lives, they would draw their last breaths in that very room. While they might never get another shot at life, their love endured through all the memories they had created together. Julian was seriously stressed about Leah's recent sleeping troubles. He reached out to his buddy Edmund, looking for some advice. Thinking he had a solution, Julian offered Leah some calming tea to help her sleep. Instead, she darted away the moment she caught a whiff of it. In a bit of a panic, he even brought in a doctor to check on her, only to find out that there was nothing physically wrong. So, Julian couldn't hold back any longer and decided to talk to Leah directly. He wanted to know what was keeping her up at night. Leah thanked him for his concern but admitted that she was just afraid it was all too good to be true, like a dream she'd wake up from. She dreaded the possibility of waking up to a reality where Julian was gone. Julian pulled Leah close, offering comfort and reassurance that things were all right. He urged Leah to share her worries with him, so she hesitated before asking him if he was happy being with her. Without skipping a beat, Julian answered with a resounding yes. He went on to say that even if they hit a rough patch, it would be all right as long as they were together. Their wedding day was never without some sort of twist. The absolute worst was that time when everyone ended up with food poisoning. Then there was that near tumble Leah took when her dress played a trick on her. Another time, they couldn't even get ready together because of some wild outbreak. Oh, and let's not forget the day when the royal choir, sent by Her Majesty herself, nearly put everyone to sleep. Then there was that one incident with the rogue mole that popped up, turning the wedding cake into a disaster. Yet despite all these mishaps, they cherished those moments as happy memories. But now, Julian was on a mission. He went to see Callian, determined to make everything from start to finish absolutely perfect. He handed over a drawing, one that Leah had sketched as a kid, envisioning her dream wedding. And astonishingly, Julian had carried that drawing with him through his 100-something lives. He wanted to turn Leah's dream into a reality, just as perfect as she'd hoped for. Here's the story about a time glitch. In Julian's 85th life, things got a bit peculiar. Instead of landing back at the Queen's palace, he found himself with Edmund, who looked a whole lot younger. It dawned on him that he'd been thrown back to his 17-year-old self, the same age Leah was when she was 11. But despite everything, the very first thing he did was head straight to see Leah. Julian snuck a peek and caught sight of Leah battling a cold. Without hesitation, he slipped into her room, took a seat on her bed, and gently rested his hand on her forehead. That simple gesture brought a smile to Leah's face. But when Julian woke up the next day, he was right back in front of the Queen, as if nothing had happened. So it seemed he had been caught in some sort of time glitch. That brief encounter, however, remained etched in Leah's memory forever. And that's a wrap. Catch you in the next new stories. Remember to give that like button a tap and drop a comment down below. Thanks for hanging out with us. Hope you had a blast.